This is the Constructionist podcast, where we take ancient stories, the person of Jesus, current events and topics, and help you construct a new Christian worldview that's relevant and loving to those around you. I'm your host, Kevin Bates. I'm a semiotician and community builder, looking at the signs of the times to build a better future together. You are tuned into the Constructionist podcast, and tonight we are sharing some thoughts on the Sermon on the Mount. I'm joined tonight by Shreya Bodner and Jacob Flug. Welcome, both of you. We are all ministers and scholars of the Bible and do our very best to try to interpret and give insight and just explicate different ideas and thoughts. And maybe we'll spend some time in the Bible. Maybe we'll spend some time in cultural issues. Who knows for the day? But hopefully today we stick with the Sermon on the Mount. We want to encourage a worldview that's built on the principles of Christ. And so we do that through a clear and honest lens of, let's say, some scripture like Matthew 5. And by doing so, we hope to offer insights and perspectives that will help you in your journey towards a greater understanding of love and compassion for yourself and others. So our goal is to provide a clear, honest, and authentic perspective on our examination. If you are interested in who we are, I want to encourage you to do two things. First, visit our website, resonatechristian.church, and if you want to connect in, download our app, go to the App Store, either Google or Apple Store, and you can get the app. That's where you'll find either our website or the app. You'll find information about our church meeting times and events and some previous media that's archived there if you want to listen to other podcasts and get caught up on this little mini-series through the Sermon on the Mount. If you enjoy us and want to support us financially, please go to the link on our website. In the show notes on the social media platform is that link that you're listening to, and visit our Give page. You can also visit our Patreon page at the Constructionists. All right, let's get into the Sermon on the Mount. And honestly, I really enjoy the Sermon on the Mount. I like it. I think that it is an amazing, passage of Scripture, and not too many people debate whether or not the Sermon on the Mount was spoken by Jesus or not spoken by Jesus. Most everyone agrees that it was spoken by Jesus. So even the highest criticism of Scripture shows that it is spoken by Jesus. So just a couple of things that I just want to just introduce, and tonight as we just do a little promo. Oh, I dropped it on the floor accidentally. Jake and I went to the Dan McClellan and Dan Beecher live podcast last night here in Portland, and he was promoting his new book called The Bible Says So. And this book is available. If I can get it up there. There we go. This book is available now for sale. If you want to get a copy of that, we encourage local bookstores like Sherwood Books. And if you go to Sherwood bookstore.com. Isn't that correct? SherwoodBookstore.com. Look it up here really quick. Put the link in the show notes. If you go to Adam Bienvenue's bookstore, you can pick this up, order this online through him where it says buy now. But this is basically what we get right and wrong about the most controversial scriptures in the Bible. So he spends a lot of time just walking through very controversial topics and ideas, and we want to encourage. That's just a little promo before we get started. And there is a few passages that he goes over in the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll just mention as we walk through this passage tonight. I'm just going to add a few little nuggets of his thoughts in there. All right, Sermon on the Mount. Let's just read our section 1, and Jake, go ahead and read section 1. Shreya, you'll read section 2, and then we'll just spend time talking about each one.
Okay. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so they can see the good things and the praise your Father who is in heaven.
I hear your dog in the background. Is that your
Yes,
dog
that's
or is
it.
that Paisley there? Whose
That's
dog is that?
Paisley's not that
Oh,
vocal.
oh, okay. Well, I think it's important that just to note that mostly Jesus is talking to a Jewish audience here, commoner Jewish audience, and also priestly Jewish audience. So people would be on the kind of the fringe listening in, people that were maybe like the unacceptable ones would be on the outer edges. Jesus is, with his words, are trying to draw these people in to just listen in to this. So he starts addressing very social issues, very, very important social issues with rebukes, with challenges, but also with transformation, where he takes these concepts of Israel being salt to the earth, right? Taking that more of now the people of God are the salt of the earth. And that is, well, it just kind of takes the nationalistic religion of Israel and just loosens the borders a little bit when he starts talking, because who would have been there? It would have been the untouchable ones. It would have been the people that maybe were in needed a little more sustenance, that might not have been fully accepted or washed clean in the temple. Do you guys have any thoughts about who was in the crowd? Number one.
I agree with you. But like it is striking then that if these are the people that society doesn't want to see, and Jesus is saying you're the ones we stick on a lampstand so that everybody else can see.
Right.
I just was talking to a very normal crowd of people that were very uneducated, illiterate, commoner, especially the time period. And so I think that we try to make these huge metaphors out of salt and light.
Yeah.
We try to make them mean so much that no commoner would ever think to know it meant. And so the idea is that how... Sorry, hold on real fast. Okay, thank you for the disruption. Here we are again. So the crowd would not have tried to have these existential metaphors of alternative realities. They would need something that was concrete that they used every day. And so salt, the preservation of things, taste, but also light. And so I think pastors and other people have tried to really dig out what this doesn't mean, and we lose the simplicity of the message, that it's just for daily living.
I also think that Israel had lost its purpose at this point. And that's why Jesus is even like on the scene here addressing Jewish people, because the nation of Israel had lost its purpose. So no longer salt. And I would say that like the light kind of just pointed on themselves, instead of being that city on a hill or on a lampstand that everyone can see, that it became something very internal that only they could see. And it was very hidden, or it was very isolation. So we know that a nation that becomes isolated, it's always bad when a nation goes through isolationism. And Israel is going through, or trying to just think about themselves. So this kind of that they're the number one importance. And I think the rebuke and the challenge here is said in a certain way that that almost to me seems a little I don't know, subversive or a little sneaky by Jesus, where he's basically rebuking this whole nation with, some these tangible objects where they go, oh, okay, that's it's not scathing fire and brimstone.
Hmm. We
It's
just
like
talked about this
palatable
this morning,
metaphor.
actually, like the isolationism that a lot of politics is leaning towards right now,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and so to not be the beacon of those who are suffering and needy and outsiders, and to turn that into more of a us first policy. I think Jesus is definitely talking against that with the salt and the light, that it was for everybody.
I think that when you become isolated, that's very unattractive as well. And so isolationism, when you are, Michelle Obama is quoted as in an interview, a generation of people are being raised to focus on their own happiness, their own wealth, their own selves. And that is their goal in life. And she was saying, when you are that way, when you are only concerned about your own happiness, your own wealth, your own life, that is a very bleak ending. Happiness goes up and down, wealth goes up and down, life goes up and down. And her encouragement in this little shtick that she did was that our goal is of service, that we're to be of service to others. And when we are of service to others, that means we have a spirit of generosity and therefore are attractive, or at least are working towards the potential of being attractive. Not everybody is going to like us. But when we have that notion or that heart of service, and I think that's what the nation of Israel had lost, is they had lost that heart of being the glory or the light of God to the world. And Jake had mentioned there's a group that meets on a regular basis. They do readings, they do all kinds of storytelling called the Moth. And the moth is the actual animal, the insect moth. And they're considered porch conversations where people just sit on porches and they tell stories. And that was the idea where the moth came from, is the light that is on the porch attracted moths. And they saw that the story attracted the people. And so the story or the light is like the attractor to the moth. Well, when you have no light, nobody sees what's there. And that's a less sexy metaphor, Jake, when you start thinking about the light on the hill is actually the attractor of insects. But but ultimately the metaphor there is not as, I guess, profound. You can't do much with it besides light attracts, darkness or isolation. Inward light is unattractive, light is attractive.
Yeah.
Trey, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, kind of related to the idea of isolationism, like you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to be a light and then be angry when people show up.
Mm.
Yeah.
And especially if it's people that you didn't want to.
Right. Then don't be a light.
Well, I mean, that's
There was
the
a
problem
time in our
is that
country.
people are trying to not be.
Right. I think there was a time in our let's talk about cities, culture, nation.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time in our world, in our era, just as a nation, that was very welcoming. The cities were welcoming. They wanted immigrants. They wanted outsiders. There's different stories of people coming to the United States, immigrating in and settling in cities, and they had these skills that people really wanted. They had like trades that had never landed here before. And they're like, wow, now we can do this. So so the outsider brought a sense of other, but that meant other things, other means, other productions, other skills as well. So you could look at the other as, oh, you're a threat. Um, or you can see it as something that can transform where you are. And the nation of Israel, I think, shows an isolationism that doesn't accept that other, therefore doesn't have other voices, doesn't have necessarily other skills. There's a time in the Kings in the Old Testament where there was no blacksmith, and so therefore there's all these wars, mayhem, and death that happens after, because the the Hebrew people did not have a blacksmith, huh?
They were fighting with sticks.
Yeah, yeah. So they didn't have this trade, and I think when you have a community that is diverse and just from all over, that brings a sense of palette that is like very colorful and very um, it can bring amazing texture to society. I read a story last night actually about San Francisco, and in the early 1900s San Francisco had a very corrupt mayor. Wasn't just a mayor that somebody elected. He actually was kind of a charlatan, an entertainer, and he was very like did some things that were very bad. And one of those things is he started releasing the building codes. So they just started building buildings in San Francisco out of cheap wood, just built them. And it was very corrupt because they were taking backroom deals basically to get things built. And the mayor was getting rich off of it. Everybody, all his cronies were getting rich off of it. And basically sold out the city to corruption. And around 1906, there's this huge earthquake that basically flattens half the city. And just right on the cusp of that as well, since most of those cheap houses were shoddily built out of wood, then the great fires of San Francisco come right out of the earthquake and burn the other half of the town down. So now you have this devastated San Francisco right in the early 1900s. And there was one banker, and he was an Italian immigrant. And it was the only bank to actually survive the great earthquake of San Francisco. And so he literally takes in a horse-drawn garbage type wagon and puts all the gold, all the silver, all the assets of the bank. He hides it in a garbage carrier, and he takes it to his house and puts it basically in his basement. And he hides all the assets. This is a true story. And this Italian immigrant, in all of his creativity, so we just had to pause for a correction because he wasn't an immigrant. He was an American, United States born banker. I got the story a little wrong. So he was a United States born banker. But the rest of the story is very accurate. So he takes the assets and he puts it hides them in his home. And then he begins to walk the streets of San Francisco looking for people that he could invest in, that he could rebuild their businesses. And those people that he loaned money to were the immigrants. He loaned money to the immigrants to to rebuild San Francisco because he believed in what they were doing. He believed in who they were as people, the trades that they brought, the creativity that they brought, the outside that they brought it to. And that was the beginning of Bank of America. That was Bank of Italy that eventually merged and then became Bank of America. So that's the story of how that all birthed, is from the fires and the earthquakes of San Francisco. But depending on this banker, depending on outsiders to bring life again to their community, I think there's something to learn there, like a city on the hill style, where when we welcome others like the moth to the light, something beautiful, a story begins to be told. All right, should we go to the next one? The next block? Awesome.
Sounds good.
See, sometimes we just make mistakes and then we just have to, figure it out. Okay, Shreya, read something for us here. What do we got? Matthew 5:21
through 26.
Great.
You have heard it said to those who lived long ago, don't commit murder, and all who commit murder will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. If they say to their brother or sister, you idiot, they will be in danger of being condemned by the governing council. And if they say, you fool, they will be in danger of fiery hell. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go. First make things right with your brother or sister, and then come back and offer your gift. Be sure to make friends quickly with your opponents while you are with them on the way to court. Otherwise, they will haul you before the judge. The judge will turn you over to the officer of the court, and you will be thrown into prison. I say to you in all seriousness that you won't get out of there until you've paid the very last penny.
Okay, start us out. What do we want to talk about with that section?
I don't think I've ever realized the make quick friends with your accuser on the way to court.
Yeah, that's kind of like...
and this version of the Bible, the CB, definitely lightened the whole, if you think negative on your brother or sister, you've already committed murder.
Sure.
Right. That's in other translations, I believe. But you're in danger of those things. I think it's interesting. And yeah, I definitely have never noticed the make quick friends. Makes sense. I think you're dealing with the people that can be easily accused, and when you don't have power, it's a lot easier to get into trouble. And so, especially where we're at, the majority of traffic stops and arrests happen by people of color and low-income people. And so if you're of a higher income or you're white, the probability of you becoming arrested is much lower. You could pretty much do, I think we've seen lately that you can do whatever you want. But if you're of a person of color or you're poor, you can't. And so with that type of wealth and privilege comes the not needing to make friends with your accuser, because you can stand there in confidence and fight back. But if he's talking to a crowd that has no power to fight back, and so I see it as that, but also the idea of premeditation or desire. And so if you think these negative thoughts, you will eventually act out in some way.
This is the beginning of the 5 antitheses, right? Where we have, you once heard said, but I say to you, correct?
Correct.
So this is the first part of 5 different antitheses where Jesus says, and he's exchanging, where he's saying, I know you've heard this, but now I say to you this. So we have basically an outward expression moving towards an inward conviction, something that the Jewish people of the day didn't necessarily equate to their spirituality. It was always an outward expression and then an outward reconciliation versus an inward expression with an inward restoration. So so there's that exchange. What I get concerned about with the Sermon on the Mount is, as I believe this is a blueprint for the way that we need to behave, sometimes these 5 antitheses give me permission to just have an inward spirituality, to where as long as I don't hate my heart and lust with my eyes, and so then it just becomes this like almost like a inward exercise of some kind of spirituality, and that's what my whole Christianity becomes, when in fact we're still leaving people out on the streets hungry. We're still leaving people out in the streets, oppressed and marginalized and and basically othered and not welcomed. And so I do believe that as this becomes an inward expression of spirituality, that outwardness can't be seen as like a total cash it in for something different. I think a lot of modern Christians have done that with their spirituality, that it just becomes this, hey, I go to church, I sit in the pews and sing silly songs, and I listen to some, rock star preacher, and I go home and that's my Christianity. I might attend a small group and men's breakfast and ladies' tea, and I'm good to go. That actually is a spiritual self attention. It's a spiritual selfishness that I don't get anymore in my life. How can I be that way and hate gay people at the same time? That doesn't work for me. That's stupid.
We were just listening to the podcast of the show we went to last night, and Ellen and Beecher had a one that came out a couple days ago about marriage and gay marriage, and one thing that they talked about that we've got into is the idea that a nuclear family is less than 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we ever quite understand the privilege of nuclear family, that that a child has a mom and a dad, and that unit is the basis of our society. That is so recent. That is a dogma that's been repeated over and over again, that has very little historical backing. And so, like what Kevin was saying, the importance of knowing how societies are made up. It's the individual that makes the whole, and that individual can be radically different than the next. And the more that we try to homogenize our environments,
Mm-hmm.
the worse off we'll become. Like going to a very homogenous church, I think in some areas it's difficult. Like where we're at, we chose to live here, and there's a reason we chose to live in the area we do. But this screen definitely represents the majority of people in our area.
Correct.
But that was a choice that we made subconsciously or consciously, that people like us, it's more comfortable. And And I think that might be what hurt people so much during COVID as well, as they finally figured out that not everyone was like them so close. And there was this visual
Hmm.
representation of a mask that showed that people were not like each other. That there was definitely two sides.
Hmm.
Well, also, I think there's something that happened during the pandemic that's important to just pay attention to is when you go to work and come home, go to work, come home, you see very few people. You might see people on the drive, you might go to the restaurant, see a few people, and then your coworkers, right? And one of the big transforming moments for me was that, and I know I'm going to age myself here, but the first time that I got on the internet, the, the World Wide Web, when I got on the internet for the first time, and I could like see what I could only read in like a National Geographic, right, or see pictures that were like a professionally taken photo. The first time that I saw something on the internet that was like an encyclopedia type of information of pictures and stuff from a different part of the world,
It
that
took
was
7 hours to download, but it still did
took
it
a long time. Yeah,
for one
that
page.
that noise that you heard, and then
Yeah.
the little bar that would. Anyway, so that was amazing. Those are some amazing times that not everybody remembers, and not everybody went through that transition. So when you then get more and more and more and more information, pretty soon you're like an information download, right? And now social media. So then you introduce social media. So now all of these but social media has algorithms to it. So what you like, what you see, what you're used to, what you are gravitating towards, that ends up on your feed. When the pandemic hit, we all of a sudden were forced to stay home, forced to hunker down, and a lot of people just got on the internet, Zoom chatted, and there were different social groups. And then all of a sudden we had this work from home concept where now you're on Zoom chats with people from literally all over the world. People not like us, people that were different, people with different ideas, different thoughts about religion. And they were kind, they were nice. And people all of a sudden met probably their first Hindu person that they've ever met before. It's like, wow, now I'm talking to this person face to face with a face and a name, not just an email, right? So there was literally a immersion that we experienced as well. And when you have a preacher up on stage preaching a certain message, but then during the week you're on a Zoom call with all of these people of color and people from different socioeconomic situations, and now you're on this call and you're like, that message that was preached doesn't seem like it fits in this relationship. And the problem was the message that was preached from the stages were not bathed with love, mercy, grace, and forgiveness. It was bathed with politics, division, and strife. But then you jump online, and now you have a Zoom call with somebody that is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and you're doing business work with that person, and they're kind and nice, and then that is not congruent with. So I do believe that during that time there was a lot of that. Um, just like Jake, you're traveling to Vietnam soon, so it seems like Vietnam's been on your mind. And one of the reasons why that war was the way that it was and people reacted so strongly was because we saw pictures of it and video of it, and we were immersed in it together. And I think that when you become immersed in something together, all of a sudden your mind, like within days, I think we can create new social norms, social perceptions and realities within days. We can change our minds. And so the church didn't work for a lot of people anymore. When they were given that time off, they're like, gosh, that's like when they felt the break. Boy, that was like, wow, love that break. Because, you need a break from hate rhetoric. So, anyway, but it galvanized people into camps, of course. And as our friend Dan McClellan said last night, people usually have picked sides and they're not switching sides anytime soon.
I forget what the passage was about.
Murder passage?
Murder
Is it
passage.
murder?
It's the five antitheses that are taking external realities and making them internal. But then my whole, like, what started me down that tangent was I get a little worried when, like, we focus on these passages where I know you heard this a long time ago. Now let me say this. And there's five of those. That our spirituality becomes internal, not external. And so how that is I can have an internal spirituality and hate gay people at the same time. That doesn't and show hate. Or I have an internal spirituality that I'm good with Jesus, right? But I can say racist things or be racist. That's just as incongruent. But I think a lot of us, especially white Christians, are there.
Yes. And something as I read this passage, if you notice the element of sacrifice in the middle, where you're actually going to the altar and seeking forgiveness, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It just reminds me that Jesus was Jewish.
Yeah.
And I think we, as U.S. Americans, really try to put Jesus as an evangelical. Mm-hmm. But he was very much Jewish. And so
Right.
even encouraging his followers to still continue in temple sacrifices is important for this section as well. That it wasn't until much later that Judaism and Christianity split completely. Yeah. And so to keep that in mind when reading this is that Jesus was pretty Jewish.
Can we read the last two sections of that 5-part section?
Let me do some math here. Hold on.
Yeah, sure.
I think it starts at verse 38.
Yeah, it's close to the end.
Next one.
Oh, go back to that.
That one.
Is that the last one?
That's the second to last one.
Best I have is the last. Go ahead.
I've got the last section. I can read it.
And then 8. Sorry, hold on. Maybe I didn't copy the love section. Uh-oh.
I've got the text open, though. I can read it.
Well, what? Okay, so do we start here, or do we go further?
I don't know. Kevin wanted to.
Kevin, is this what you wanted to do?
I was just looking at the eye for an eye, and when you look at, I say to you that you must not oppose those who want to hurt you. If people slap you on the right cheek, you must turn the left cheek to them as well. When they wish to haul you in court, take your shirt, let them have your coat too. I just want your opinion on that. Like, what do you think of that?
I do see still power dynamics at play. That
okay,
as an occupied people, being slapped in the face and being asked for your cloak and carrying the shield was all things that able-bodied people were sometimes required to do by the Roman army.
Mm-hmm.
And so to not fight against it, I think culturally at this time as well, you had the zealot movement. And so Jesus was probably talking more about not being a zealot and to try to make change in a peaceful way, and not to just to give violence for violence. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's just Hammurabi's code. So he's like, you've heard it state probably forever that
Right.
that give what was given to you, like repay violence with violence, or
Yeah.
might makes right. We're hearing that a lot right now.
Mm-hmm.
Might makes right. Yeah, that's what I take from that.
I remember N.T. Wright saying that we're not supposed to be in a resistance movement based on this passage, that when it says do not oppose, that word oppose actually means resistance. So do not resist people. And that's the wholesale, that's the revolutionary word. That's a word for revolutionary resistance, where we are not to be revolutionaries trying to resist people who oppose us in this way. So I wonder with some of our actions, like even when we oppose certain things, like, is this our call to be a little more strategic and a little more creative in our revolutionary style? Because wholesale resistance, revolutionary resistance, ultimately many times is not effective. Maybe this is a call to non-violent resistance instead of violent resistance. Like instead of like the slapping of the face, kind of shows the violence versus the non-violence. So maybe our resistance, maybe this is the call to non-violent resistance. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Do you want to talk first or me?
I don't have it formed yet.
Okay. So, two things I think about. First is that I do believe in a pacifist Christianity, that war, power, and violence was never a part of the Christian message. However, when I read, I think that's from a reading as well, a very privileged perspective where I'm not occupied, I'm not a slave, I'm not held against my will. So when you read like liberation theology, especially,
Right.
they believed in they cue in Marxism as well, and that there will be a violent uprising from proletariat to bourgeois, and with that power struggle will come violence, and I think as well the church has used the idea of nonviolent resistance to try to keep people from rising up against the power structures that are already in place.
Trey, do you have any thoughts? Yeah. Okay.
Mostly the same things. I agree. As a white lady, I'm not very comfortable telling folks who are not also white ladies that they have to remain pacifist and try and change things that way, because I don't think I understand the full scope of their experience, and that's not fair. I do wonder, like, so if this is written to an occupied people, and that's not where I find myself, do I make the same choices? because there's also this call from people of color for those of us who are white to put our bodies on the line for them. And I think that's worth paying attention to as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now that you mention that, if I just could mention in Dan McClellan's book that there is a revealing in these 5 sections that not only are they an occupied people, like you said, so there is an affirmation that they are an occupied people. I mean, honestly, they're just put in this place and surrounded. It's like, don't mess with us, just stay here and be quiet type of thing. But also the women uh, of that area. Ultimately, this almost just reveals a social dynamic between men and women too. That the women were occupied people, like by the men. So you have a double occupation, where women were considered properties or property and such. So what was being taught here definitely is seen through that lens. I just wanted to give that little tidbit because I did read that in the Bible says so, around page 200 and change, where where the you have to read these scriptures through that lens, right? That's what I've been learning, that if this is said in like a restriction, um, exile for Old Testament stuff, occupied by Roman in their territory type stuff, and then also the subjugation of women as property and no rights and such. And there's also this weird, which I don't know what to do with yet, is, and it moves to, okay, that can't mean this, and you're telling me to not hit back, and you're telling me to just be slapped around, right? I'm an occupied person, right? And now you're telling like this other person that's occupied on top of occupied, well, if I get hit, like, um but I think that just metaphorically and a little like lifted out of such darkness, um that there is some sense of equality that Jesus is giving to the occupied and the occupier. Now, I think caveat that with the Israelite people, the Jewish people thought that they were better than. And since they thought that they were better than, they actually have a problem with the occupier as their dogs. And so here soon we're going to see, are these people welcome into this nation? Are these outsiders welcome? At what point do we, reach out these eyes? But I think that's too complicated for today, honestly. So when we made it through two sections. We're not going to make it to our third section, which is okay.
More than 2. I think we did 3 or 4.
Did we do? No, we only did the 2 sections. So, but that's okay. That just gives us some not light reading. I was gonna say that just gives us some light things to think about. I think it's a little deeper than that, but definitely there's all kinds of things in the Sermon on the Mount to learn and to really take heart. I do believe that the Sermon on the Mount is a blueprint, is a filter in which, okay, I need to make these decisions. I want to live this way. Maybe peruse through the Sermon on the Mount and see what Jesus has to say about, indebtedness and loans and oath giving and all, oath taking and all these things that he talks about, even politics and community and such. There's a lot there that I think that Jesus gives in this sermon that are not hidden messages, but definitely like not even soft glove messages. We take them as soft glove. And there's a lot of people who would consider the Sermon on the Mount weak. And I don't think the Sermon on the Mount is weak. I think it's definitely one of the strongest and in tax sermons that we get the heart of Jesus. And possibly the Sermon on the Mount was just the beginning of the end of his life. Because if you were a Jewish lawkeeper and you were listening to that, basically he is saying, okay, I'm Moses and the prophets and the law and the prophets, it's all fulfilled, it's done. Seal that up. It's time for a new era. And they couldn't handle that. Any concluding thoughts? We're good? All right.
We're good.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight.